Well, the Army Chief General Bipin Rawat is to fly the indigenous LCA Tejas Combat Aircraft at the Aero India show today, and well, the Principal Scientific Advisor to the government, P.S. Raghavan, will also ride it later, what is being reported by news agency ANI, and these are live visuals now of this. The Army, of course, Army Chief's scheduled sortie comes just a day after the CELILAC, the regulator for military aviation, gave a final operation clearance to the homegrown fighter, clearing way for the induction into the Indian Air Force. And these are visuals there on your screens of that Aero India show 2016. And this is, of course, the 12th edition of the Aero India 2019, which started on a tragic note when there was a crash at one of the rehearsals just a day before, in which 3 pilots were involved. One of those later had fatal injuries and died. And this, of course, however, is a grand show of India's Air Force strength, and, of course, its latest inductions of helicopters, including on show and display would be the helicopters from the Tejas and the series of MiG, the Sukhois as well, present at this Aero India show that takes place in Bengaluru every year since the 1990s. And this is India's air defense power at display at the Aero India show. And as we've been pointing out, that the Army Chief is also going to be flying the indigenous Tejas Combat Aircraft at the Aero India show. And the Principal Scientific Advisor to the government will also take the ride later, and the Army Chief's scheduled sortie comes just a day after the regulator for military aviation gave its final nod. Nishita, my colleague, is now joining us live for the very latest on this. And Nishita, well, some grand images all through the last 3 days from Aero India, and now we know that the Army Chief will be flying the Tejas combat fighter.
That's right. It's a special passenger for Tejas just a day after it received the final clearance for combat. So General Rawat will fly this homemade fighter jet. It is one of the smallest and lightest multi-role supersonic fighter jet in its class. And yesterday we saw it display some amazing stunts. Today too, there are 3 different slots for Tejas to display its stunts. And General Rawat flying it will only add to the whole hype around Tejas. Let's not forget that the country has waited really long for Tejas, for India's homemade indigenous fighter jet. And even as much is being spoken about the F-16 display, and you have the display by Rafale, the politically contentious issue, but Tejas' display received much accolades here despite all the criticism, and General Rawat flying the homemade fighter jet only adds credibility to the same.
Well, absolutely. And while we wait those visuals of the Army Chief actually taking that flight of the indigenous Tejas, now, Nishita, there were other fighter jets on display as well through the last 2 days. Take us through all that has been on display at Aero India.
Well, some of the highlights that were on display as far as fighter jets go is the Rafale, of course, because we know that the whole politics around it has become bigger than the fighter jet itself. According to the French ambassador, Mr. Alexander, who spoke to Wion yesterday, he went on to state that by September they are focusing on delivering the first batch of Rafale to India. Apart from Rafale, you have the F-16s that were displayed, some fantastic performances that were put up by the F-16 pilot, even a tribute that was paid by the F-16 pilot to the wing commander who lost his life in the stunt tragedy of Surya Kiran that went wrong just a day ahead of Aero India 2019 was set to begin. You also had the stunts being performed by Saras. You had the group Rudra choppers performing as well. You had the Sukhoi perform some stunts, maneuvers like the barrel maneuver, the free fall maneuver were being performed, and it will continue for the next 4 days as well till Sunday when Aero India 2019 is on. Although the Ministry of Defence as well as the Indian Air Force claims that this Aero India is bigger than that of last year, with as many as 409 companies participating and 61 aircraft on display. But at the same time, if we do compare it to the previous edition of 2017, the number of companies have dipped and the number of displays have also dipped. But if you look at Aero India, even as we take a spin around the massive venue, it is Rafale that is attracting a lot of attention. And soon we could even get to interact with the pilots of the Rafale aircraft.
All right, Nishita, thanks very much indeed for joining us for the latest there, the Aero India show on display. And it's, the Light Combat Aircraft, the Tejas indigenous built fighter jet will be getting a fresh, new special passenger today, and that would be the Army Chief, who will be taking the fighter jet for a spin, and we will be getting you those visuals very soon.